Clara Whitaker pressed Thomas Boone's last letter against her chest like it could stop the bleeding, because that's exactly what it felt like standing alone in the middle of that crowded ranch yard, surrounded by strangers who looked at her the way people look at something they want to step on. She hadn't come to make trouble. She'd come to do the last decent thing a dying man had asked of her. But trouble found her anyway. It wore dusty boots, carried a rifle, and just told the entire county she was his wife. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe and follow Clara and Wyatt all the way to the end, because this one doesn't end the way you think it will. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer heat in Colorado territory didn't ask permission. It simply arrived heavy, relentless, sitting on a person's shoulders like a debt they couldn't pay off. Clara Whitaker had been riding since before dawn, and every mile of it had been a negotiation between her body and her will. She told herself she would be in and out in under an hour. Deliver the letter. Offer her condolences. Leave before anyone asked questions she didn't have the right answers to. Simple. Clean. Done. She was wrong about all three. The Boone Ridge Ranch yard was packed with people the moment she arrived. More people than she'd expected for a funeral gathering so far into the mountains. Men in good coats stood in clusters. Women in dark dresses whispered behind their hands. Hired riders leaned against fence posts with their arms crossed and their eyes moving the way men move their eyes when they're being paid to notice things. Clara pulled her horse to a stop at the edge of the yard and sat very still for a moment, taking it in. Thomas Boone was dead. He'd died 3 weeks ago under circumstances his last letter described as not what they'll say it was. She'd copied legal papers for Thomas twice. He'd come to her schoolhouse in Millbrook with trembling hands and ink-stained fingers, asking her to read through documents he said he didn't fully understand. She'd understood them well enough to know they were dangerous. And when the news of his death reached Millbrook, she'd understood something else. The letter he'd left in her care was no longer just a letter. It was evidence. She slid down from the horse, smoothed her dress, gray worn at the hem. Not at all the right dress for a gathering like this, and walked toward the main cluster of mourners with the letter tucked against her ribs. She made it about 12 steps before the trouble started. That's her. The voice came from her left, low, deliberate, designed to carry. Clara turned. The man was tall, heavy-set, dressed in the kind of black that cost real money. He had the kind of face that had never been refused anything important, and the kind of eyes that knew it. He was standing with 2 other men who wore sidearms the way other men wore jewelry, casually, and with full awareness of the effect. That's the woman from Millbrook, the tall man said, not to her, but about her the way you talk about livestock or furniture. Thomas Boone's schoolteacher. Several heads turned. Clara kept her chin level. I came to offer my respects, she said. I don't believe we've been introduced. Silas Creed, the man said, like the name itself was a threat. I own the Southern Colorado Railroad Syndicate, and I have a significant interest in what you're carrying against your dress there, miss. Clara's hand moved instinctively to the letter. She stopped herself, but not fast enough. Silas Creed smiled. It was the worst kind of smile, patient and certain. Thomas Boone was in possession of railroad survey maps before he died. Creed said, his voice lifting, now reaching the crowd. Private company documents. I have reason to believe he shared those documents with at least one person outside the company. Someone he trusted. He paused. Someone he was perhaps more personally acquainted with than was appropriate. The implication landed exactly where he intended it to land. Clara felt the yard shift around her, felt the whispers start. I was Thomas Boone's letter writer, she said clearly and calmly, though her heart was doing something complicated behind her ribs. That is the entirety of my relationship with him. I copied legal correspondence on his behalf. That is a legitimate professional service. Is it? A new voice, younger female, cutting as broken glass. Clara turned again. The woman was beautiful in the way that certain cold things are beautiful, precise, constructed, built for impression. She wore black that fit her like a statement. She looked at Clara's gray dress with an expression that wasn't quite contempt, because contempt requires acknowledgement of equal status, and she clearly granted none. "Evelyn Creed," the young woman said, "and you must be the schoolhouse widow in the borrowed frock." She tilted her head. "Tell me, did Thomas Boone promise you something? Money, a position. Men in his condition sometimes make promises they can't keep." "Thomas Boone died," Clara said. "Whatever he promised or didn't promise died with him. I came here to deliver something to his family, that's all." "His family?" Evelyn repeated, tasting the word like she found it amusing. "And which family member were you planning to deliver that letter to?" "Exactly, Thomas didn't have a wife. He didn't have children. The only family he had left is standing right behind you," said a voice. And everything stopped. Clara hadn't heard him approach. Nobody had, or if they had, they'd chosen not to announce it the way people choose not to announce a change in weather until it's already on top of them. He was not what she'd expected. She didn't know precisely what she had expected, something polished, perhaps given the quality of the ranch and the quality of the crowd. A man who looked like money and moved like ownership. Wyatt Boone looked like neither of those things. He was lean in the way that hard work makes a man lean, not in the way that comfort does. There was a scar along his left cheek, old settled into the skin part of him now, the way the mountains were part of the ridge. His coat was clean, but not new. His hat was pulled low against the sun. His eyes, when they found Clara's face, were the color of creek water in August, still deep, and giving nothing away for free. He carried Thomas's grief the way men carry grief when they've carried everything else their whole lives silently and with both hands. "Wyatt." Silas Creed's voice shifted, less performance, more calculation. "Didn't expect to see you out here yet. Thought you were still up at the north pasture." "I came back," Wyatt said. Simple, factual. His eyes hadn't left Clara yet. She watched him look at the letter still clutched against her chest. Watched something move across his face. Recognition, or maybe just understanding. He'd seen his brother's handwriting before. He knew the seal. "This woman," Silas said, "was found in possession of—" "I heard what you said." Wyatt's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I heard every word of it from the fence line." He stepped forward one step, two, until he was standing beside Clara, close enough that the crowd had to choose sides. "You were either standing with Wyatt Boone, or you were standing against him, and in this yard on this day, nobody wanted to be the first to make that choice publicly." "Mr. Boone," Silas said carefully, "I understand your grief. Losing a brother is—" "Don't." The word came out quiet and absolute. "Don't talk to me about my brother at his own funeral, Silas. Not today." Silas's jaw tightened. His eyes cut briefly to the letter in Clara's hands. "Then perhaps you can explain who this woman is and why she's here carrying private documents." Wyatt looked at Clara. She didn't know him. He didn't know her. She was a schoolteacher from Millbrook with ink-stained fingers and a worn gray dress, and one dead man's last act of trust pressing against her ribs. She could see him thinking, calculating, deciding, arriving at something. She saw the decision happen before he spoke. She couldn't stop it. "She's my wife," Wyatt said. The yard did not make a sound. Clara's breath left her body entirely. "I'm sorry," Silas said. "You heard me." Wyatt's hand came to Clara's elbow, light, careful, but unmistakably deliberate. "Clara Boone, my wife. She came from Millbrook because I asked her to, because Thomas sent word to her before he died, and because she's carrying a private letter from my brother to my family. Not your railroad, Silas. My family." He looked directly at the older man. "And any man who puts a hand on her answers to me personally." Evelyn Creed made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Silas looked at Wyatt for a long moment. Then very slowly he smiled. That smile was worse than everything that had come before it. "Well," Silas said softly, "isn't that interesting?" Clara's legs were steady. She had made them steady through sheer will, because her legs had no opinion about what was currently happening, and her will was the only thing operating correctly. Wyatt Boone had just told 50 witnesses that she was his wife. She had been at this ranch for less than 15 minutes. She had never spoken to this man before in her life. And Silas Creed was smiling the way a man smiles when someone else's mistake hands him exactly what he needed. Wyatt moved. Not fast. Nothing about him was fast. She was already learning that, but with absolute direction. He steered her gently but firmly toward the house, one hand at her elbow, cutting through the crowd, the way a man cuts through brush, efficiently without apology. People stepped aside. She let him move her because there was nothing else to do. Because the alternative was standing in the middle of that yard and explaining something she didn't have words for yet. She heard Evelyn's voice behind her, sharp and controlled. "Did you know about this, father?" She heard Silas's answer. "No, but I intend to." Wyatt closed the front door behind them. The house was dim and cooler than outside. Clara didn't look at it. She looked at him. "What?" She said in a voice she was proud of for its steadiness. "Did you just do?" Kept you from getting dragged off Creed's men for questioning. He took off his hat. Without it, he looked younger and more tired. "They would have. He's done it before. He had a land surveyor from Denver held in the Durango jail for 2 weeks on a made-up charge. And your solution was to tell everyone I'm your wife. It was the fastest solution. It was the worst solution. Probably." He said it without defense, which somehow made it worse. "But it was the one I had." Clara pressed Thomas's letter against her chest and looked at the ceiling for a moment, composing herself. "Mr. Boone," she said, "I am a schoolteacher. I have a position. I have a reputation in Millbrook that I have worked extremely hard to maintain. I am not married to anyone, and I have no intention of— I know." His voice was quiet. "I know all of that." "Then why?" "Because you were standing in my brother's yard holding my brother's letter, and Silas Creed was about to take it from you." He met her eyes. "Thomas sent it to you. Not to me, not to our lawyer, not to anyone else. He sent it to you, which means he trusted you. And right now, that's enough for me." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Thomas trusted a lot of people," she said finally. "And most of them let him down." Something moved in Wyatt's eyes. Pain clean and old, the kind that doesn't ask for acknowledgement anymore. "Yes," he said. "They did." She opened the letter. Not all of it. Just the first page, which she'd already read 3 times on the road. She turned it so Wyatt could see his brother's handwriting. Uneven, rushed, clearly written in the last weeks of his life, when his hands weren't quite cooperating. "Wyatt," it began. "If you're reading this with Clara Whitaker, it means she made it to Boone Ridge, and it means she trusted me enough to do the last thing I asked of her. Don't let father's pride make you stupid. Read what she has. Believe her. She's the only honest person either of us knows." Wyatt read it twice. His jaw was very tight. "He wrote more," Clara said. "Pages more. About the land agreement, about what Creed forged, about what happened near the mountain pass." She folded the letter carefully. "He asked me to bring it to you personally because he was afraid to send it by post. He was afraid Creed had someone at the mail office. He was right. Creed does." Wyatt turned away from her toward the window. She could see his shoulders working that particular tension of a man trying to absorb information his body doesn't want to accept. Thomas found out Creed had forged part of the land agreement. The part that gives Creed's syndicate right of passage through the mountain pass if I don't marry Evelyn before the end of summer. Clara absorbed this. "Your father signed an agreement requiring you to marry Evelyn Creed. My father signed what he thought was a fair trade agreement with a man he trusted. Creed added language later. Thomas found the original document and the altered version." He turned back to her. "He died before he could get them to a lawyer." "He got them to me," Clara said. "I have the copies. He asked me to make them myself in my own hand, so there'd be a clean version." She paused. "I wasn't entirely comfortable with that, Mr. Boone. I want you to know I considered not coming. What made you come?" She thought about Thomas Boone's face in her schoolhouse, young, frightened, trusting her with something that was clearly costing him everything. He used his last good days to get me those documents, she said. He used his last week to write that letter. A man uses his last week that way. The decent thing is to honor it. Wyatt looked at her for a moment. Just looked the way a man looks at something unexpected and is trying to decide what it means. The marriage, Clara said, has to end. It can't. Not yet. Mr. Boone. If I take it back now, Creed knows something is wrong. He'll push harder, faster. He'll find a way to get that letter before we can get it to a real lawyer. He ran one hand across the back of his neck. I need a week, maybe 2, long enough to get copies to the federal land office in Denver. You want me to pretend to be your wife for 2 weeks? I want you to be safe for 2 weeks. The pretending is... He paused. Logistically necessary. Clara stared at him. He was not a smooth man. He was not selling her anything. He was presenting the situation with the particular stripped-down honesty of someone who had no time for performance and very little practice with asking for help. She hated how much she respected that. I have a school, she said. I have children waiting for me in Millbrook. School's out for summer. He said it without apology. I know because Thomas mentioned it. That's why he waited until summer to send you. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Thomas, she thought you planned this. I want 3 things, she said. Wyatt waited. I want my own room. Of course. I want it understood between us that this arrangement ends the moment we have those documents safely in federal hands. The moment you have what you need, I walk out of here a free woman reputation restored with a letter from you explaining the arrangement to anyone who asks. He nodded once, slow. Done. And I want to read the rest of Thomas's letter tonight, alone, before you see it. She met his eyes. He wrote things in there that were for you, not for me. But there were also things he wrote for me, and I intend to read those privately. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, something that might have been the beginning of respect settled into the lines around his eyes. Deal, he said. Outside, she could hear the murmur of the crowd returning to its grief and its gossip weaving them together the way crowds always do. Inside, she could hear Wyatt Boone breathing in the same room as her, which felt like the most significant thing that had happened all day. Mr. Boone, she said quietly. Wyatt, I'll call you Mr. Boone until we've decided this is survivable. She tucked the letter back against her ribs. And for what it's worth, I came here to bury your brother's secret, not to become yours. He put his hat back on. The brim shadowed his eyes again, and whatever she'd briefly seen in them was gone. Thomas always said you were the most honest woman in Millbrook County, he said. Thomas was right. Then we're starting from a decent place. He moved toward the door. I'll have Ruth set up the east room. We'll go back out together in 10 minutes. Together means standing close enough to look convincing. It doesn't mean, I understood your meaning, she said. He stopped with his hand on the door. Didn't turn around. I'm sorry about Thomas, she said. He was a good man. He talked about you. A silence. What did he say? That you were the only person he'd ever met who was more stubborn than he was. She paused. He said it like it was the thing he admired most about you. Wyatt opened the door. The noise of the funeral yard rolled in over the threshold heat and voices, and the particular weight of public grief that has begun to curdle into something else. 10 minutes, he said, and walked out. Clara stood very still in the middle of the room. She pressed one hand flat against Thomas's letter. Outside, Silas Creed's voice floated through the window, smooth, conversational, unbothered, as he spoke to someone she couldn't see. A wife, he said, appearing at a funeral. Isn't that something? A pause. Find out who she really is, Silas said. Everything. Where she came from, what she has, and what my leverage is. Clara pulled in a slow breath. She'd come to Boone Ridge to bury a secret. It appeared the secret had other plans. 10 minutes passed, the way 10 minutes pass when a person is counting every second of them. Clara smoothed her dress, tucked the letter securely inside her coat, and walked back out into the heat with her chin level and her hands steady. Wyatt was waiting at the bottom of the porch steps, hat pulled low, arms crossed, not impatiently, just the way a man waits when he's been waiting his whole life and stopped being bothered by it. He didn't offer her his arm. She didn't ask for it. But when she stepped up beside him and they walked together back into the yard, the distance between them was exactly what a husband and wife who'd been together long enough to stop performing about it would naturally keep close enough to be a unit, far enough apart to be real. Clara noticed Silas Creed notice it. That was when she understood what she'd agreed to. Not in the abstract, not in the cool dim of the house where it had felt like a negotiation between two practical people. But here in front of 50 sets of eyes with a dead man's secrets pressed against her ribs and a living man's name attached to hers without her permission. She understood it in her bones. Mrs. Boone. One of the older women, heavy-set, kind-faced, wearing a mourning brooch that had seen considerable use, stepped forward with both hands extended. "I'm Mabel Garrett. I run the dry goods on the Durango Road. I'm so sorry for your loss, both of you." Clara took her hands without hesitation. "Thank you, Mrs. Garrett." Thomas spoke of this community with a great deal of affection. That was true. It required no performance at all. Thomas had talked about Boone Ridge the way people talk about a place they love and are afraid of losing. "We didn't know Wyatt had married," Mabel said, and the statement had a question tucked inside it, gentle but definite. "We kept it quiet," Clara said. Given the land dispute, Wyatt felt a public announcement would have given Silas Creed something else to use. She paused, just long enough. "We were probably right." Mabel's eyes went to Wyatt. Wyatt gave a single slow nod, the kind of nod that contains no specific information, but sounds confirming. Mabel's expression shifted from curious to sympathetic, which was exactly the shift Clara had aimed for. "Smart," Mabel said quietly. "Creed's been circling this ranch like a buzzard for 2 years." "I know," Clara said. "Thomas told me." Mabel squeezed her hands once and moved away, and Clara let out the breath she'd been managing very carefully for the past 45 seconds. Wyatt leaned slightly toward her, not enough for anyone else to read. "That was well done," he said, barely above a murmur. "I taught school for 6 years," she said. "I've been managing a room full of people who want to catch me making a mistake since I was 22. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Is that what I am? A room full of people? Right now, you're one of the simpler problems in this yard," she said. "Stand straight. Evelyn Creed has been watching you for the last 2 minutes, and she looks like she's building up to something." He straightened. She was right. Evelyn Creed did not come at Clara directly. That would have been too obvious, and Evelyn Creed, Clara was quickly learning, was not a woman who did obvious things when a surgical thing was available. Instead, she materialized beside Clara near the water pump about 20 minutes later, appearing the way certain problems appear quietly, without announcement, and at the worst possible moment. "You're very good," Evelyn said, not as a compliment. "I beg your pardon. The way you handled Mabel Garrett." Evelyn's voice was low, perfectly controlled. "The hesitation before, we were probably right. Very natural. Very convincing." Clara looked at her steadily. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Evelyn tilted her head. "I want you to understand something, Miss Whitaker. I'm going to call you Miss Whitaker because that's what you are. I don't have a quarrel with you personally. You seem intelligent. You seem practical, which means you're capable of understanding what I'm about to tell you. Then tell me, Wyatt Boone is a man who will work himself to death on that mountain and call it living. He doesn't know how to want anything for himself, never has. Whatever is in that letter of yours, whatever you think it gives you, it doesn't give you him. Because Wyatt Boone has spent 34 years making sure there's nothing in him left to give." Evelyn's eyes were steady. Not cruel, something closer to honest, which was somehow more unsettling. "Walk away now, and you walk away with your dignity. Stay, and whatever happens to this ranch happens to you too." Clara held her gaze. "Is that a threat, Miss Creed? Or a warning?" A pause. Something moved in Evelyn's expression. Brief, complicated, gone before Clara could name it. "I haven't decided yet," she said, and walked away. Clara stood at the water pump and did not let herself think about that for more than 30 seconds. 30 seconds was the budget she allowed herself for things that unnerved her. After that, she filed it and moved on. She filed it. She moved on. She did not stop thinking about it. That night, Silas Creed did not leave with the rest of the mourners. He stayed with the particular ease of a man who considers himself a permanent feature of wherever he is, and accepted Ruth's offer of supper with the confidence of someone who knows the offer was made under duress. Ruth Boone Ridge's housekeeper, a solid, gray-haired woman who communicated primarily through the controlled deployment of silences, set 3 extra places at the table with the expression of someone performing an unpleasant but unavoidable medical procedure. Clara sat at Wyatt's right. She had been a school teacher for 6 years. She had sat across from angry fathers, resentful school board members, and suspicious landowners who thought educating girls was a waste of perfectly good paper. She had learned how to eat a meal without letting anyone at the table know what she was actually thinking. She applied everything she knew. Silas talked about the railroad. He talked about progress about the mountain pass, about the inevitability of development in the Colorado Territory. He talked about all of it with the pleasant, comprehensive confidence of a man who has already decided the outcome and is simply narrating events. And then, between the main course and whatever Ruth had produced for dessert, he set his fork down and looked at Clara with an expression of pure, friendly calculation. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Boone," he said. Clara kept her face pleasant. "I'd appreciate that. I don't believe this marriage is real." Wyatt went very still beside her. "But," Silas continued, holding up one hand, "I am a reasonable man, and what I believe personally and what I can prove legally are 2 different animals." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope, which he set on the table between them. "There is $10,000 in federal notes in that envelope. It's yours, Miss Whitaker. I'll call you by your real name since we're being honest, if you walk out of Boone Ridge by morning and tell me what's in that letter." The table was absolutely silent. $10,000. Clara's annual salary was $360. She had $42 in savings. She looked at the envelope for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at Silas Creed. "No," she said. Silas blinked, just once. "I beg your pardon." "No." She picked up her fork. "And I'd suggest you take that envelope off the table before Ruth comes back, because she strikes me as a woman who will throw it at you." From the kitchen doorway, Ruth made a sound that might have been agreement. Silas looked at Wyatt. Wyatt was looking at Clara with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something between surprise and something else, something with more weight to it. "You understand," Silas said carefully, "that refusing my offer makes this considerably less comfortable for you." Mr. Creed. Clara set her fork down and gave him the precise look she reserved for school children who had decided that disrupting the class was worth whatever came next. "I have been a poor woman my entire adult life. I have managed a 1-room schoolhouse on a salary that would embarrass you. I have been talked down to by men with more land and less sense than God ever intended a single person to have. Your envelope does not impress me. Your manners do not intimidate me. And your railroad," she folded her napkin very deliberately, "is not my problem. Good evening." She stood. Wyatt stood half a second after her instinctive, like a man who was still catching up to what had just happened in the room. Silas picked up the envelope. His expression had gone smooth and flat and entirely unreadable, which Clara suspected was what Silas Creed looked like when he had just made a decision. "Good evening, Mrs. Boone," he said pleasantly. "We'll talk again soon." He was right about that. The next 2 weeks arrived the way difficult things do not all at once, but in layers. The first layer was Ruth. Clara had expected the housekeeper to be cold or suspicious, or both. Instead, Ruth was simply watchful in the way of someone who has been burned before and intends not to be burned again. She didn't ask questions. She didn't make conversation. She simply moved through the house in her efficient particular way and let Clara figure out the terrain herself. On the third morning, Clara came down at 5 o'clock because she couldn't sleep, and found Ruth already in the kitchen with coffee made and a second cup set out on the table. Clara sat down. Ruth poured without being asked. They drank in silence for a full 10 minutes. "Thomas liked his coffee too strong," Ruth said finally. "Not to anyone in particular, just into the air between them. He drank it that way at my schoolhouse too," Clara said. "I kept telling him he was going to ruin his stomach." Ruth set her cup down, looked at Clara directly for the first time. "He trusted you," she said. "He shouldn't have trusted just me," Clara said honestly. "He should have had more people in his corner. He was working alone on this for too long." Ruth nodded once slow. "Yes, he was." She picked her cup back up. "The East Room had a draft in winter. I moved the extra quilt to the chest at the foot of the bed, in case you get cold nights." It was the most personal thing Ruth had said to her. Clara understood it for what it was. "Thank you," she said. The second layer was the work. Wyatt ran Boone Ridge the way he did everything practically without decoration, and with the full commitment of a man who doesn't know how to do anything by half. She'd assumed he would keep her out of it. He didn't. On the fourth day, he came to find her in the study where she'd been reviewing Thomas's copies of the land documents, and dropped a second set of papers on the desk beside her. "Account books," he said. "Creed's been arguing the ranch is operating at a loss, which would support his claim that the land agreement should be renegotiated. I know it's not true, but I need someone who can read the numbers clearly enough to prove it." She looked at him. "You want my help. I want your ability to read legal language without making it sound like it terrifies you. Most of the men I could ask would either be intimidated by Creed or already on his payroll." He paused. "Thomas said you were the sharpest reader he'd ever met." Thomas was generous. Thomas was accurate. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. "I'll tell you what I know about the ranch operations. You tell me what the documents say and what they should say. Between us, maybe we can build something a real lawyer can use." She looked at him across the desk. He was not comfortable asking for this. She could see it in the set of his jaw, in the way his hands were resting flat on the table, a man who is accustomed to handling everything himself and is choosing deliberately, and at some cost, to his pride, to do otherwise. She pulled the account books toward her. "Start from the beginning," she said. "Tell me about the North Pasture." They worked until the light failed. It was not romantic. It was not comfortable. It was two practical people sitting across a desk from each other in the dying summer light, arguing about figures and interpreting language, and occasionally disagreeing with enough force that Ruth appeared twice in the doorway, just to confirm nobody was being physically harmed. But somewhere in the second hour, Clara stopped being careful about what she said and started simply saying it. And somewhere in the third hour, Wyatt stopped framing his answers and started simply answering. And at the end, when she'd marked the 3 sections of the land agreement that showed clear signs of later insertion, different ink density, slightly misaligned margins, a clause numbering that skipped from 7 to 9. He looked at her work and was quiet for a long time. "Thomas found all 3 of those," he said finally. "I know. He told me what to look for." She set the pen down. "But I found a 4th one, Section 12, subsection B. The language about water rights. It references a survey date of April 1869, but the survey office in Denver won't have a record for that date because the territory wasn't surveyed that far north until 1871. Wyatt stared at the document. "That means," he said slowly, "the entire water rights clause is built on a survey that didn't exist when the agreement was supposedly signed." "Yes." He looked up at her. She looked back. "That's enough to invalidate the whole section," he said. "Probably enough to invalidate the whole agreement if a federal judge looks at it." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. Heavier. Something had shifted in the room, though Clara couldn't have named precisely what. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he'd used her given name without the context of performing for an audience. "Don't," she said before he could continue. He stopped. Don't thank me yet. We still have to get it to Denver, and Silas Creed has had people watching this ranch since the funeral. I counted 3 riders on the ridge yesterday morning. She stood straightening the papers. We need to think about how to move the documents safely. And we need to do it before the end of summer, before Silas pushes the marriage agreement through the local court. He was still looking at her. You counted the riders, he said. Of course I counted the riders. From where? From the upstairs window while I was hanging my dress to dry. I'm poor Mr. Boone, not unobservant. Something happened in his expression, quick, genuine, almost surprised out of him. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one she'd seen from him. Wyatt, he said. She gathered the papers. I'll consider it. The gossip arrived in town on the 7th day. The way gossip always arrives, slightly ahead of the people. It's about and considerably larger than the truth it started from. Wyatt needed supplies from the Durango trading post, and he needed to be seen in town with Clara, and both of them knew it. So they rode in on a Tuesday morning in the full summer heat, with their backs straight and their expressions settled, and the trading post fell quiet when they walked through the door, the way rooms fall quiet when something has happened that everyone already knows about and is waiting to see confirmed. The man behind the counter, a heavy-set merchant named Ellis, who Wyatt greeted by first name, recovered his manners fastest. Wyatt, good to see you. And this must be Clara, Wyatt said. Mrs. Boone, Clara added, because specificity mattered, and she was choosing to be specific. Ellis nodded a little too carefully. Well, congratulations to you both. Terrible timing given Thomas. I'm sorry. Thank you, Wyatt said. It was going well enough until the woman in the dry goods aisle turned around, and Clara recognized her as the wife of one of Creed's associates. She'd seen them together at the funeral. The woman looked at Clara with the particular expression of someone who has already formed an opinion and is now examining the evidence to see how well it confirms what she'd decided. You're the school teacher, the woman said. From Millbrook. Yes, Clara said. They're saying in town that you were Thomas Boone's, she paused, choosing her word, companion. The trading post was very quiet. Clara set the item she was holding down on the counter and turned to face the woman fully. She did not raise her voice. She'd learned years ago that a lowered voice in a quiet room carries further than shouting. Thomas Boone was a man who came to my schoolhouse to have legal correspondence read and copied, she said. He came because he needed someone who could read well and keep quiet. I did both. He paid me for the service. Whatever people are saying in town, I'd invite them to examine where those particular stories started and who benefits from them. She held the woman's gaze. Is there something else? The woman said nothing. Wyatt beside her was also saying nothing. But his hand had come to the small of her back, barely there, barely touching the kind of contact that isn't intimate, so much as it is absolute. And the statement it made to the room was clear. They were a unit. Whatever came at one, came at both. The woman looked away first. On the ride back, Clara didn't mention it. Neither did Wyatt. But after about a mile of silence, he said without preamble, You didn't have to say all of that. I know. It would have been easier to stay quiet. Easier for who? He considered this. Fair point, he said. Another quarter mile. The heat pressed down on them both. You're not what I expected, Wyatt said. What did you expect? Thomas described you as a quiet woman. Thomas saw me at work, she said. I'm quiet when I'm reading. I'm not particularly quiet when someone is lying about me in a public space. He nodded once, slowly. The way he nodded when he'd been given information, he was filing somewhere important. 3 days before the church picnic, Ruth pulled Clara aside in the kitchen and told her something she hadn't been told before. Thomas came to me 2 months before he died, Ruth said. Her voice was level, but her hands weren't. She was holding her coffee cup with both hands, which Clara had already learned was Ruth's tell. He told me he'd found the forgery. He told me he was afraid. A pause. He also told me that if something happened to him, I should trust whoever came with his letter. that the person who came would be the right person. Clara set her own cup down. Did he know what would happen to him? Ruth looked at her directly. Thomas Boone rode in mountains he knew like the inside of his own house. He didn't fall off that ridge by accident. She let that sit. No, he knew. The weight of it settled onto Clara's chest like a stone. Thomas had known. He'd sent the letter anyway. He'd put his last hope in a schoolteacher from Millbrook with ink on her fingers and $42 in savings, because he'd run out of other options, and he'd decided she was the best one he had left. That night she went to Wyatt. She found him in the barn, not because anything needed doing in the barn at 9 o'clock at night, but because some men go to places that smell like work and animal and honest sweat when they need to think, and she'd already learned that Wyatt Boone was that kind of man. Ruth told me, she said. He was standing at the stall door. He didn't turn around. She shouldn't have. She thought I needed to know. Clara stopped beside him, looking at the same nothing he was looking at. I think she was right. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything, she said. It means Silas Creed had your brother killed. It means this isn't just a land dispute. It means the man eating supper at your table last week. I know what it means. His voice came out rough, rougher than she'd heard it. I've known since the week after Thomas died, when I rode up to the pass and found the place where his horse went over and the story didn't match. He was quiet for a moment. I just couldn't prove it. The journal might prove it. He turned to look at her. Thomas mentioned a journal in his letter, she said. The second page, the part you haven't read yet. He said he kept a record, dates, conversations, things Silas said in front of him that he shouldn't have said. He hid it at a line shack near the east face of the mountain pass. She met his eyes. He was afraid to send it with the documents. Too much risk. He said if someone got to it first. He didn't tell me, Wyatt said. He was protecting you. She paused. The same way he protected everyone he cared about. Badly, because he did it alone. The silence between them was different now. Harder, sharper. The kind of silence that happens when two people are standing at the edge of something large, and both of them know it. We need to get to that shack, Wyatt said. I know. Creed's riders cover that area. I know that too. He looked at her, really looked the way he'd looked at her twice before, like he was revising something. You're not scared, he said. It wasn't entirely an accusation, but it wasn't not one either. I'm terrified, she said. I've just been terrified before, and I know it doesn't stop you from doing the necessary thing. Something moved across his face. Quick and unguarded, gone before she could hold it still long enough to name it. Get some sleep, he said. We'll figure out the shack after the picnic. The picnic. Church social, Saturday. Half the county will be there, including Silas Creed. He'll use it to test us publicly. He put his hat on. Which means we need to be ready. They were not ready. Saturday came with the particular confidence of a day that doesn't know it's about to be difficult. The summer air was clean, and the ridge was gold in the morning light, and the church social at Miller's Crossing had been running for 23 years without incident. Silas Creed started the incident about 40 minutes in. He did it the way he did everything, smoothly, publicly, with enough witnesses to make retreat impossible. He simply walked up to where Wyatt and Clara were standing with Mabel Garrett and two other ranch families, smiled his pleasant, terrible smile, and said, I wonder if you'd indulge me, Wyatt. I'd love to hear the story of how you two met. Given the surprise of it all, I think the community would appreciate knowing. The small group around them expanded. It always did when Silas Creed started speaking. Clara felt the trap close. Wyatt's jaw had tightened by exactly 1 degree. Nobody else would have noticed. She noticed. She spoke before he could. We met in Millbrook, she said, on a Tuesday in April. Wyatt came in with Thomas to have some papers filed, and Thomas introduced us. He thought. She smiled and put warmth into it. That was real, because the memory of Thomas she was building around was real. He thought we'd either hate each other immediately or get along perfectly. He told me later he was betting on the second one. The small crowd was very attentive. Thomas said you were the most practical woman he'd ever encountered. She continued, her eyes on Wyatt's face, finding something in him to anchor to. He said you didn't have patience for nonsense or performance, and that in his experience, most people only come in two types, the ones who spend their whole lives performing, and the ones who are too tired to bother. She paused. He said you were the latter, and he said that was rare. Wyatt was looking at her now. She kept going. Because the thing about a convincing lie is that it has to be built around something true, and she had enough truth to work with. I didn't believe him, she said. I thought he was talking up his brother because that's what younger brothers do. And then I met you. She looked at Wyatt directly and said completely plainly, and you were exactly what he said you were. No more, no less. Just honest. Honestly difficult and honestly kind, and... She stopped. Adjusted. And that's not a small thing. It's actually quite rare. The silence was different from the one in the trading post. Mabel Garrett made a small sound. Silas Creed's smile had gone very still, and Wyatt Boone was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before and could not immediately classify, not surprise exactly, and not gratitude, and not the careful neutral he usually wore. Something underneath all of that. Something that had no practical use in their current arrangement and no business being there at all. Well, Silas said. His voice was smooth, but his timing was off, which was the first time she'd seen his timing be off. Isn't that something? It is, Mabel said firmly. It really is. Clara smiled at Mabel. She did not look back at Wyatt. She was not ready for what she'd see if she did. They rode back to Boone Ridge in the late afternoon, and for the first mile, Clara counted fence posts to give herself something specific to do with her attention. Wyatt said nothing. He usually said nothing. But this nothing was different from his usual nothing in a way she couldn't quite put a name to and wasn't sure she wanted to. That story you told, he said finally. It worked, she said. It did. A pause. Was any of it true? She kept her eyes on the road. Most of it, she said. And then, before he could ask which parts, we need to plan the route to the line shack. Creed's riders changed their pattern after the picnic. I noticed 3 of them taking a new position on the south ridge. He let her redirect it. But she felt him let her redirect it, felt the deliberate choice of it. Felt him filing the thing. She hadn't answered the same way she filed the thing she wasn't ready to hold yet. That night, sitting at the study desk with the land documents spread between them and Ruth's lamp oil burning low, Wyatt spread the trail map across the top of everything else and circled the line shack with one rough finger. 2 days' ride, he said. If Creed's riders hold their new position, there's a window on the east approach, maybe 3 hours before they reset. When? Clara said. 3 days. He looked up. Can you ride that far? Can I? She stopped. Mr. Boone, Wyatt, I rode from Millbrook to Boone Ridge alone on a horse that had a loose shoe and a suspicious temperament. 3 days ago, I stood in a trading post and dressed down a railroad associate's wife in front of an audience. Last week, I turned down $10,000. She met his eyes. Yes, I can ride that far. He held her gaze. Yes, he said slowly. I reckon you can. And in the lamplight, with Thomas's documents between them and Silas Creed's riders on the ridge, and a plan half made, and a truth neither of them was saying yet. Hanging in the warm summer air, Clara Whitaker, schoolteacher, letter writer, and borrowed wife, realized something that was going to make everything considerably more complicated. She had stopped counting the days until she could leave. She didn't know exactly when it had happened, but it had happened. Somewhere between the account books and the trading post and the church picnic, somewhere in the spaces between what was performed and what was real, she had stopped counting. And that frightened her more than Silas Creed's riders, more than the forgeries, more than the ride to the line shack. Because Clara Whitaker had survived everything life had handed her by knowing exactly when to leave. And she wasn't sure anymore that she did. 3 days didn't feel like long enough to prepare for anything, and they weren't. They left before dawn on the day Wyatt had marked on the trail map riding east before the sky had made up its mind about the color it wanted to be. Clara had slept 4 hours. Wyatt, she suspected, had slept none. Ruth had packed food without being asked and pushed it into Clara's saddlebag with the wordless efficiency of a woman who had watched too many people ride away from this ranch and learned not to say the things that didn't help. They rode in silence for the first hour because the terrain demanded attention, and because neither of them had found a way to address what had happened at the study desk 3 nights ago. The thing that had been said and the thing that hadn't been said, both of which were now riding alongside them like a third person with opinions. Clara counted the ridgeline instead of thinking about it. She made it to the 2nd mile marker before Wyatt said without turning, "Someone's been on this trail since yesterday." She looked at the ground the way he'd taught her to look, not at the obvious impressions, but at the disturbed edges, the places where something heavy had moved and the earth hadn't fully settled. She saw it, fresh, a horse shod moving deliberately. "Creed's," she said. "Probably." He pulled up slightly, scanning without appearing to scan a skill Clara had been trying to learn for a week and hadn't mastered yet. "There's a second approach to the shack, longer, goes up through the pine break on the north face. It adds 40 minutes but keeps us off the marked trails." "Take it," she said. He did. The 40 minutes felt like 2 hours. The heat built as the sun climbed, and the air carried the dry, electric edge that Clara had learned to read in the past 2 weeks, the kind of air that precedes a mountain storm, the way a held breath precedes bad news. She mentioned it to Wyatt. "I know," he said. "We have maybe 5 hours before it breaks. Should be enough." Should be. She filed the uncertainty and kept riding. The line shack was exactly where Thomas's letter had described it. A rough structure against the rock face of the east ridge, barely visible until you were almost on top of it, built into the landscape, the way things built for hiding are always built. Wyatt checked the approach twice before they dismounted. Inside, Clara went immediately to the south wall, to the loose board Thomas had described in the 2nd page of his letter, 3rd plank from the floor left of the window frame, one rusted nail pulling free at the top corner. She'd read that description so many times she could have found it in the dark. The board came away on her 2nd pull. Her hand found the journal. It was smaller than she'd expected, a pocket-sized thing, black cover worn at the corners, the kind of journal you could carry inside a coat without anyone knowing. She opened it and knew immediately from the first line that Thomas Boone had written it, knowing someone else would read it. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. He'd written it to be found. "Wyatt," she said. He came to her. She held the journal so they could both read the first page. March 14th. "Silas Creed told me tonight after supper that the mountain pass would be his before summer ended one way or another. He said it the way he says everything, like a fact that had already happened. I asked him what he meant. He said some agreements are better honored than argued. I think he was talking about the marriage agreement. I think he was talking about Wyatt. I don't think he was only talking about those things." Wyatt's jaw set. Clara turned the page. April 2nd. "I found the original survey document in Creed's Durango office. I wasn't supposed to be in that room. I copied what I could. The alteration is in section 12 and also in the marriage clause. The date was changed, the witness signatures don't match the notary record from the same month. Someone did this carefully. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing." She turned again. April 19th. "Creed knows I've been in his office. He didn't say it directly. He doesn't say anything directly. But he sent 2 men to ride my usual trail this week, and last Thursday one of them stopped me near the ridge and asked where I was going in a tone that wasn't asking at all. I need to move faster." And then 5 pages later, the entry that stopped her breathing entirely. May 3rd. "I heard Creed tell his man Deller that the pass problem would resolve itself naturally if someone made sure I understood the risks of riding too close to the eastern ledge in poor conditions. He said it like that, naturally. The eastern ledge. That is where my usual trail runs above the canyon. A line break. Then I sent the copies to Clara today. If you're reading this, Clara got them to you. Trust her. I know you don't trust easily, Wyatt. Trust her anyway. She's the only one who came through for me when she didn't have to. The shack was absolutely quiet. Wyatt did not move for a long moment. Then he took the journal from her hands very gently and held it like something that needed to be held carefully. Like something you couldn't put down and couldn't hold without cost. He knew, Wyatt said. Yes. He knew, and he still went up that trail. He ran out of time, Clara said. He needed more days, and he didn't have them. Wyatt closed the journal. His eyes had gone somewhere she couldn't follow, somewhere back behind the wall he kept between himself and everything that hurt him. The wall she'd been watching him maintain for 2 weeks, with the precision of a man who had built it over a lifetime and considered it structural. Wyatt? We need to go, he said. We've been here too long. He was right. She knew he was right. But she also knew that what they'd just read was going to sit inside him like a coal burning slow and deep, and there was nothing she could do about it on a timeline, so she tucked the knowing away and followed him outside. The riders appeared on the South Ridge 17 minutes into the ride back. 3 of them. Moving too purposefully to be coincidental, positioned too well to be anything other than planned. Someone had known they were coming, even by the northern route, which meant someone had been watching the ranch, or watching the trail approaches, or both, and had simply waited. Clara. Wyatt's voice was very calm. When I say go, you ride hard, and you don't stop until you hit the tree break on the north face. You know that trail now. Stay on it. What are you going to? Go, he said. And then louder sharply, go, now. She went. She heard shouts behind her, heard the sound of horses pushing hard. She did not look back, because looking back was the thing that got people killed in situations like this. And she had chosen to survive. She had chosen that specifically and definitively. And so she rode with everything she had low in the saddle, the journal pressed hard against her ribs. The storm broke 15 minutes later. It didn't come gradually. It simply arrived the way Wyatt had described mountain storms to her on the 3rd day. The way he'd said there's no warning shot. There's just the storm, and the lightning hit the ridgeline to the east so close she felt it in her teeth, and the dry grass on the south-facing slope caught almost immediately. The smoke changed everything. She couldn't see the trail. She couldn't see the riders. She couldn't see anything except the gray press of rain and smoke and the particular terrifying combination of them and her horse, already frightened, already making decisions based on animal instinct, rather than her guidance pulled hard toward the canyon draw to the west, toward lower ground away from the fire. She let it. She had no better option. The canyon was narrow and deep, and the walls kept the worst of the rain off. She got the horse stopped, got herself dismounted before her hands were shaking too badly to manage it, and stood in the relative shelter of the rock face, with rain hammering everything above her, and fire still visible on the ridge, moving in the wind orange against the gray. She was alone. She was in a canyon she didn't know in a storm, with evidence that could bring down Silas Creed and put her on the stand of a murder investigation, with riders somewhere behind her who were definitely not lost. For approximately 30 seconds, Clara Whitaker allowed herself to be afraid. Fully, completely, honestly afraid. Then she heard hoofbeats. She pressed back against the rock wall, hand on the journal. Clara. Wyatt's voice. She knew it immediately, knew the specific frequency of it, the way she'd learned to know the sounds of the house at night, the way you learn the sounds of any place you've lived in long enough to relax. She hadn't realized until that moment that she'd learned it, that she'd relaxed. Here, she said. He came around the narrow bend on foot, leading his horse. There was a cut above his left eye, fresh bleeding into his brow, and his coat was soaked through, and he was breathing hard in the way a man breathes after riding very fast through very bad terrain. He stopped when he saw her. Just stopped. Something in his whole body that had been held tight went slightly fractionally less tight. "You're not hurt," he said. "I'm not hurt." She looked at the cut. "You are. It's nothing." He brought the horse in close to the wall and checked its legs the way he always checked the horses first before anything else, and under other circumstances, she might have found that annoying, but right now, she found it entirely characteristic and entirely him. Creed's men lost us in the smoke. They'll reset once the fire burns to the draw. How long do we have? In this rain, the fire won't hold. 2 hours, maybe 3. He straightened. We waited out here. 2 hours. In a canyon. Alone. In the rain. Clara sat down against the rock wall and pulled the journal out to check it. The oilcloth Thomas had wrapped it in had held Paige's dry evidence intact. She let out a slow breath. Wyatt sat beside her. Not close. Not far. Just present the way he was present in the same room with the same quality of attention he gave to things that mattered and didn't need to announce it. They sat in silence for a while. Then Clara said, "You keep calling me your wife when men threaten me." Wyatt didn't answer. "In the yard at the trading post at the picnic," she said. "Every time something comes at me, you step forward and call me your wife and the room changes. I've watched it happen 6 times now." "It works," he said. "That's not what I'm asking." She turned to look at him. His profile was set, guarded rain running off the brim of his hat. "What am I when no one is watching?" The silence stretched. "You know what the arrangement is," he said. "I know what the arrangement was," she said. "I'm asking what it is now." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. That he was going to retreat behind the wall the way he always retreated when something came too close to a thing he hadn't decided how to handle yet. Then he said, "You're the most real thing that's happened to me in a long time." Clara held very still. "That doesn't mean anything specific," he said before she could speak. "I'm not saying it to—" He stopped. Tried again. "I'm not asking you for anything. I know what the agreement is. I know you have a school and a life and $42 in a tin box in Millbrook, and I know none of that includes this ranch or—" He stopped again. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was managing something difficult. "I'm just telling you the truth, since you asked." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Wyatt," she said, "I've been used by desperate people before." He turned to look at her then fully, and the thing in his eyes was not offense. It was understanding. Worse than offense. "Not like that," he said. "You can't know that." "No, I can't." He held her gaze. "But I can tell you that the only reason I haven't said it out loud until now is that I don't have the right to. You're here because Thomas asked you to be. You're here because Silas Creed backed you into a corner in my yard, and I made it worse. Everything good you've done on this ranch you did because you're decent, not because you owe me anything." He looked away. "I know the difference between a debt and a choice. I won't ask you to make a choice you haven't made." Clara said nothing. She was thinking about counting fence posts, about counting riders on the ridge, about all the ways she'd been keeping herself at a careful, measurable distance from what was happening in her chest for 2 weeks, and how none of them were working anymore. "I need to think," she said. "Take whatever time you need." "I mean, I need to actually think, without you looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're already apologizing for whatever I decide." He turned his face away. She could see the muscle in his jaw. "I'm not apologizing for it," he said. "I meant what I said. All of it." "I know." She pulled the journal closer to her. "That's exactly why I need to think." The rain eased by the second hour. The fire on the ridge had burned down to smoke and blackened grass, and the air smelled like wet earth and char, and the particular clean sharpness that comes after a mountain storm has said everything it needed to say. They rode back in the early dark side by side, saying nothing. They were 3 miles from Boone Ridge when they saw the torches. Not Creed's riders this time. Sheriff's men, 2 deputies and a wagon, positioned at the main gate, with the particular arrangement of official people who have been told to wait and are waiting with the authority of a document behind them. Wyatt pulled up. Clara felt the change in him immediately, that specific stillness that preceded the careful kind of danger. "Stay behind me," he said. "Wyatt." But the deputy had already seen them, had already raised one hand in the particular way of men who represent the law and need you to understand that before anything else happens." "Clara Whitaker," the deputy called. "I have a warrant for your arrest issued by the Territorial Court. Charge of theft of private railroad documents belonging to the Southern Colorado Railroad Syndicate." Everything that followed happened fast. Wyatt pushed his horse forward. Clara grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said. "Don't. If you resist a warrant, they charge you too, and then we have nothing. They're not taking you." "Wyatt!" She held his gaze. Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something real. "They're taking me. And then you're going to get Thomas's journal to the federal land office in Denver, and then you're going to come get me out of whatever jail Silas Creed has put me in that order." She let go of his arm. "Trust me the way Thomas trusted me." He looked at her like he'd been struck. She turned to the deputy. "I'll come with you," she said. "I don't need the wagon." The Territorial Courthouse in Durango was a 2-day process that felt like 2 years. Clara spent the first night in a clean cell, not cruel, not rough. Silas Creed had too much public reputation to arrange something that would look obviously punitive, and used the time to go over every document she'd memorized, every section of the land agreement, every date in Thomas's journal that she'd committed to memory in the canyon while Wyatt wasn't looking. By the time the hearing opened on the second morning, she was ready. What she wasn't ready for was the room. Silas Creed had brought half the county. Every seat was filled. The Durango newspaper had a man with a notepad near the back wall. Mabel Garrett was there good. 3 of Creed's associates. 2 railroad attorneys in expensive coats. And Evelyn Creed, sitting at the far right of the gallery, with her hands folded and her face arranged into something that Clara could not read at all. The territorial judge was a narrow man named Calloway, who had the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned not to have opinions about powerful people. Creed's attorney stood and made his opening case with polished confidence. Clara Whitaker, an itinerant schoolteacher with no fixed residence and no legitimate claim to be at Boone Ridge, had arrived in possession of private railroad survey documents stolen before Thomas Boone's death, and had used a fraudulent claim of marriage to avoid lawful questioning. Furthermore, the attorney said, "The claim of marriage itself appears to be fabricated a legal shield constructed to protect Miss Whitaker from legitimate inquiry and to complicate the enforcement of a valid land agreement between the Boone family and the Creed syndicate." Judge Calloway looked at the defense table, where a lawyer named Briggs, the best one Wyatt had been able to get to Durango in 36 hours, was already on his feet. "Counselor." But Briggs had barely opened his mouth when the courtroom doors opened. Wyatt Boone walked in. He had ridden hard, 2 days fast. He hadn't slept. She could see all of it, the road dust on his coat, the set of his shoulders, the controlled expression of a man who has been managing himself through sheer will for 48 hours and intends to keep managing. He walked to the defense table without looking at anyone else in the room. He set a sealed envelope in front of Briggs. He whispered something. Briggs's eyebrows went up. Then Wyatt turned to face the room. And Silas Creed said with the smooth patience of a man springing a trap he'd been setting for weeks, "Mr. Boone, I think the question before this court is simple. Was this woman actually your wife? Or did you invent a convenient fiction to protect a criminal?" The room waited. This was the moment. Clara knew it. Wyatt knew it. Creed knew it. Wyatt could save himself his ranch, his land, his legal standing by saying the marriage was false. By telling the simple technical truth. The forgery evidence was in Denver, now being reviewed. He didn't need her testimony. He could walk away from this courtroom, from this arrangement, from everything that had happened in the past 3 weeks, and nobody could blame him for it. He looked at Clara. She looked back at him and very slightly shook her head. "Don't," she meant. "Don't do this for me. Not like this." He looked away from her. "No," he said. The room stirred. "No, it was not a legal marriage at the moment I said it," Wyatt said. His voice was level, completely level. The voice of a man telling the truth at a cost he's already calculated and accepted. "I told the people in my yard that Clara was my wife because Silas Creed was about to have his men take her, and she was standing in my yard holding my dead brother's letter, and I had about 4 seconds to make a decision. He looked directly at Silas. "So I made it." Silas's attorney stood. "Your Honor, I'm not finished." Wyatt didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What happened after that, what happened over the following 3 weeks, is not a fabrication and is not a legal defense. It is the truth of what actually occurred between two people who had no reason to trust each other and found one anyway. He paused. "I am asking this court to marry us legally today if Clara Whitaker is willing. Because I am done pretending that the arrangement was only ever an arrangement." The room broke open. Mabel Garrett said something that wasn't a word. Judge Calloway struck his gavel twice 3 times. "Order!" Clara was on her feet. She was not thinking about the room, or the newspaper man, or Silas Creed's expression. She was looking at Wyatt Boone, who had just publicly confessed a lie, and publicly replaced it with a truth that could cost him everything, and who was looking back at her with the steady, unperformable expression of a man who has said the thing, and is now simply waiting to see what comes next. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "I have evidence relevant to both the charge against me and the validity of the land agreement underlying this entire proceeding." Calloway looked at her. "Counselor." "Let her speak," Briggs said quickly. Clara opened the journal. She read the entry about the Eastern Ledge. She read the entry about the forged survey date. She read Thomas Boone's account of Silas Creed's conversation about the mountain pass resolving itself naturally, and she read it in the clean, precise voice she'd used for 6 years to make things clear to people who needed clarity. The room got very quiet in the way rooms get quiet when something irreversible has just been said. Silas Creed's attorney was on his feet, objecting on 3 simultaneous grounds, and Calloway was striking his gavel, and Creed himself was standing with his hands on the gallery railing and his face doing something complicated that was not quite the pleasant, patient expression she'd come to know. And then Evelyn Creed stood up. Nobody expected it. Not Clara, not Wyatt, not Silas, whose head turned toward his daughter with an expression she had never seen on his face before. The expression of a man suddenly uncertain of the ground he's standing on. "Your Honor?" Evelyn said. Her voice was perfectly controlled as it always was, except that this time the control was pointed in a direction nobody in this room had anticipated. "My name is Evelyn Creed. My father's attorney has represented my position in this matter as aligned with the syndicate. I need to correct that record." "Evelyn," Silas's voice was low. Warning. She did not look at him. "I was aware my father had altered the land agreement," she said. "I became aware of it in March. I also became aware in April that Thomas Boone had discovered the alteration." She paused. The pause had weight. "My father told me in those words that Thomas Boone's interest in the mountain pass would be concluded before summer." She set her hands on the gallery railing. "Thomas Boone died in May, on the Eastern Trail, in conditions that experienced mountain riders don't fall in." She looked at her father. "I told myself it wasn't what it appeared to be. I have been telling myself that for 3 months, and I am done." The silence was absolute. Then the room erupted. Calloway's gavel went hard and steady. Silas Creed's attorney was shouting objections. 2 of Creed's associates were on their feet. The newspaper man was writing so fast his hand was a blur. And Silas Creed was looking at his daughter with an expression that Clara, watching from across the room, could only describe as the moment when a man understands that something he thought he controlled has made its own decision. Wyatt had reached Clara's side without her noticing how. His hand was at her elbow, that same light, certain touch, and she turned to look at him and found nothing performed in his face at all. Just him. Just exactly what he was. "The Denver office received the documents," he said quietly under the noise. "I had them copied and filed before I rode back. Creed can't touch them now." "Is it enough?" "It will be." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" "I've been in jail for 2 days on a false charge," she said. "I'm considerably better than all right." She paused. "What you said to this room, I meant it. I know you meant it. That's not what I'm—" She stopped. Across the courtroom, Calloway was restoring order with considerable force, and Creed's attorney had gone pale in the way of men whose entire argument has just collapsed from three directions simultaneously, and Evelyn Creed had sat back down and was staring at her hands with the expression of someone who has done a thing and is now living on the other side of it. Clara looked back at Wyatt. "You said," she told him quietly, "that you wouldn't ask me to make a choice I hadn't made." He held very still. "I've made it," she said. "I'm telling you now, while there's nobody listening who needs to believe it, and while Silas Creed's attorney is busy falling apart across the room, and the timing is terrible, and I look like something a mountain storm dragged through a canyon." She held his gaze. "I've made it." Wyatt Boone, who was not a man given to visible emotion, who had spent 34 years maintaining a wall between himself and everything that might cost him more than he could pay, looked at her in the middle of a courtroom full of shouting people and did the thing she had not seen him do once in 3 weeks. He let the wall down. Not all of it. Not even most of it. Just enough, just the fraction that makes the difference between a man who is present and a man who is surviving, and Clara saw it happen, saw the precise moment when he stopped managing and simply was. "You have terrible timing," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm working on it." Judge Calloway's gavel struck the bench one final definitive time. "This court will hear the full evidence," he announced. "And this court will be suspending the land agreement in question, pending a federal review of its legitimacy. Mr. Creed's attorney, I suggest you prepare for a significantly longer morning than you planned." Silas Creed sat down. For the first time in 3 weeks, he sat down without looking like a man who already knew how things were going to end. And Clara Whitaker, schoolteacher, letter, writer-woman who had ridden into Boone Ridge 3 weeks ago in a worn gray dress with a dead man's secret and $42 in savings, stood in the middle of a territorial courthouse with evidence in her hand and a borrowed name she'd just decided to keep, and breathed. Just breathed. Wyatt's hand found hers under the noise of the room. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. They just stood there side by side, holding on with the quiet certainty of two people who have been through enough together to know the difference between holding on because you have to and holding on because you mean it. This was the second kind. And outside, Silas Creed was speaking in a low, urgent voice to his attorney, and Evelyn was still staring at her hands, and the newspaperman was still writing, and the summer heat was still pressing against the courthouse windows like it had been pressing all along. Patient, indifferent, waiting for everyone inside to figure out what it had known from the beginning. That some things once broken open cannot be put back the way they were. And that's sometimes not often, but sometimes that is exactly the point. Judge Calloway took 4 hours to review the full evidence. 4 hours in which the Durango Courthouse became the most attended building in the territory, in which Mabel Garrett organized what could only be described as an informal community tribunal in the hallway outside the main chamber, in which Silas Creed's attorney filed 2 motions that Calloway dismissed in the time it takes a man to read a sentence and decide it isn't worth his mourning. Clara sat at the defense table and did not fidget. Wyatt sat beside her and did not speak. They had run out of things to manage in the short term and were now simply waiting. Which is the thing that reveals more about a person than anything they actively do? Wyatt was not good at waiting. She'd learned that. He managed it precisely with the controlled stillness of a man who had decided stillness was the appropriate response to this particular situation. But underneath it, she could feel the tension of someone whose body wanted to be doing something useful and was being firmly overruled. She put her hand over his on the table. He looked down at it, then up at her. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But the stillness changed quality. When Calloway returned, he took exactly 45 seconds to read his findings. The charges against Clara Whitaker were dismissed in full. The Southern Colorado Railroad Syndicate's land claim on Boone Ridge was suspended pending a federal fraud investigation initiated by the territorial court. Silas Creed was ordered to surrender his copies of the land agreement to the federal land office within 10 days. Mabel Garrett started clapping before Calloway had finished the last sentence. Silas Creed did not move for a long moment. He sat at the plaintiff's table with his hands flat on the surface and his face doing the very careful work of not doing anything visible. Then he stood, buttoned his coat with precise, unhurried fingers, and looked across the room at Wyatt with the expression of a man who is filing something away rather than surrendering it. "This isn't finished," he said. Not loudly, just clearly. "Yes, it is," Wyatt said, equally clear. "Get off my land, Silas. Don't come back." Creed's attorney touched his arm. Creed shook him off. Looked at Clara one more time, not with hatred, which would have been easier to read, but with a cold assessment, like a man revising a calculation, and walked out. The room exhaled. Briggs was shaking Wyatt's hand. Mabel had somehow crossed the room at a speed inconsistent with her size, and was gripping Clara's arm with both hands, saying something about justice, and about time, and about a casserole she intended to bring to Boone Ridge within the week. 2 other women from the church picnic had appeared beside her. The newspaper man was trying to get to Wyatt. 3 ranch families who had been waiting in the hall pushed through the door all at once. Clara stood in the middle of all of it, and felt with a clarity that almost knocked her sideways how alone she had been for the past 3 weeks. Not lonely. Alone. There is a difference, and she had been managing the difference so carefully for so long that she'd stopped noticing the weight of it. The weight was lifting now, and the lifting hurt in the particular way that relief always hurts when you've been carrying something longer than you realized. She found Ruth's face across the room. Ruth had come. She hadn't mentioned it. She'd simply ridden 2 days, arrived at some point during the proceedings, and stationed herself in the back corner of the gallery with the expression of a woman who had not come to celebrate but to witness, which was its own category of loyalty. Their eyes met. Ruth gave a single definitive nod. Clara nodded back. The conversation was complete. She was looking for Evelyn. She found her at the side door of the courthouse, already coated her bag at her feet, with the particular stillness of someone who is leaving and knows it and has made peace with the knowing. "Miss Creed," Clara said. Evelyn turned. Her face was composed, but not the composed of performance, the composed of someone who has just spent 4 hours sitting very straight in a gallery while her own testimony dismantled her father's life work and is now operating on something beyond feeling. "I don't need anything from you," Evelyn said. Not unkindly, just factually. "I know," Clara said. "I came to say thank you." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. "Don't thank me for telling the truth. It's what I should have done 3 months ago." She picked up her bag. "If I'd done it, then Thomas Boone would still be alive." The words landed between them without softening. "You didn't know what he'd do," Clara said. "I suspected." Evelyn looked at her directly. "There's a difference between not knowing and choosing not to look, Miss Whitaker. I chose. I'd like to stop pretending otherwise." She paused. "I'm going to Denver. I have a cousin there who runs a millinery. I have skills that are better suited to honest work than to whatever I've been doing for the past 5 years." "I think that's right," Clara said. Evelyn looked at her for a moment. "You know," she said, "when I told you in the yard that Wyatt Boone had nothing left to give, I was wrong." She adjusted her bag strap. He had exactly one thing left. He just needed someone he couldn't argue out of deserving it. She opened the side door. "Take care of the ranch. It's good land." She walked out. Clara stood at the side door for a moment and thought about Thomas Boone, who had trusted the right people too late, and about Evelyn Creed, who had trusted the wrong one too long, and about the particular mathematics of choices made under pressure, and what they cost, and what they make possible. Then she went back inside to find Wyatt. They rode home the following morning, all 3 of them, Wyatt, Clara, Ruth, in the particular companionable quiet of people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. The summer was beginning its slow lean toward early autumn. Clara could feel it in the quality of the morning, the way the light hit differently, the way the heat had slightly less conviction than it had 3 weeks ago. Boone Ridge looked different to her now. She couldn't have said exactly what had changed. The ranch was the same structure it had always been, but she'd spent 3 weeks learning every room of it, every argument it made against the seasons, every place where Ruth had quietly shored up what time was pulling apart. She'd ridden its trails. She'd read its accounts. She'd sat up late in its study, arguing over its future with a man who cared about it the way people only care about things they've built or been built by. It felt like a place she knew. That was new. And it mattered more than she'd expected it to. Wyatt unsaddled the horses. Ruth went inside. Clara stood in the yard and looked at the ridgeline, the east face, past the mountain that had been the source of all of it, and felt the complicated thing that happens when a danger you've been living inside of simply stops. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of the space where peace could eventually build if something didn't knock it down first. Clara. She turned. Wyatt was standing at the barn door with an envelope in his hand, and an expression she hadn't seen before. Careful in a new way. The kind of careful that isn't managing something difficult, but is trying very hard not to do something wrong. "Come inside," he said. She came inside. He'd set 3 things on the work table while she'd been standing in the yard. An envelope she didn't recognize, a leather pouch that clinked with the particular sound of money, and Thomas's journal. She looked at all 3, then at him. "The journal is yours," he said. "Thomas left it to you as much as to me. More maybe. You earned what's in it, and you carried it through a canyon in a lightning storm, which is more than I did." He pushed the leather pouch forward. $400. It's what I have in ready cash. It's enough to get you back to Millbrook, get you settled and cover the next 6 months while you find your footing." Clara looked at the pouch, then at him. "And the envelope," she said. He hesitated. Just 1 second. "Open it." She picked it up. The return address was the Millbrook County School Board. She looked at Wyatt. He was watching the wall behind her. She opened it. It was a letter of reinstatement. Not just reinstatement promotion. Millbrook primary and secondary head teacher increased salary, formal letter of commendation attached. Dated 10 days ago. 10 days ago, she'd been in a Durango jail cell. She read it twice. Then she looked up at him. "You wrote to the school board," she said. "Before I rode to Durango." He was still looking at the wall. "I didn't know how the court would go. I thought—" He stopped. "You had a life. You have a life. I wasn't going to let what happened here cost you the one you built." Clara set the letter down. She was quiet for long enough that Wyatt finally looked at her, and what he found in her face made him go very still. "You wrote to the school board," she said again slowly, "before you came to the courthouse, before you stood up in front of that room and said everything you said." "Yes." "So when you said all of that in front of Silas Creed and the judge and the newspaper man and God and everyone, I meant it. I know you meant it. That's not—" She pressed both hands flat on the table because she needed something solid under them. "Wyatt, you stood up in that courthouse and told the truth and confessed everything, knowing that you had already arranged for me to be able to leave if I chose to. You gave me the exit before you made the declaration." He said nothing. "Do you understand?" she said, and her voice was doing something she hadn't authorized it to do, something that had more feeling in it than she'd intended to let out in this particular moment. How rare that is, to want someone and hand them the door at the same time. "I told you," he said quietly. "I know the difference between a debt and a choice. I didn't want you staying because the door was locked." Clara looked at him. Wyatt Boone, who had spent 34 years making himself into a man who needed nothing and asked for less, who had maintained the wall with the diligence of someone who believed the wall was the only thing keeping him functional, who had told the truth in a courthouse at personal cost, and then come home and laid out an exit route on a work table for the woman he'd told it about. "I have conditions," she said. He blinked. Just once. Then slowly something in his face rearranged itself. "All right. No more secrets. Not about the ranch, not about the finances, not about the things that are keeping you up at night. If we're doing this honestly, we do it honestly." "Agreed. I keep teaching. I don't know if it's Millbrook or here or somewhere else, but I will not give up the work. It's mine. I know that." He said it without hesitation, which mattered. I already talked to 3 families on the ranch about their children. If you were willing to stay, we'd build a schoolhouse. There are 14 children within riding distance of Boone Ridge who have no formal education. She stared at him. You already talked to families. Before Durango. When I thought I might need a reason good enough to ask you to consider staying. He met her eyes. I knew you wouldn't stay for me alone. I needed to give you something worth staying for. The thing that was happening in Clara's chest was no longer something she could describe as complicated. It had simplified entirely the way complicated things sometimes do when enough of the surrounding confusion is cleared away. Third condition, she said. Her voice was steadier now, settled. This marriage, the real one, not the one you invented in the yard, has to be spoken plainly, not managed, not performed. When we disagree, we say so. When something is hard, we say that too. No more pretending. I'm not good at that, he said. I know. I'll try. That's all I'm asking. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one from the courthouse, the one where the wall was down. She'd stopped being unsettled by it. She'd started somewhere in the past 48 hours to look for it. Clara. He said her name the way he'd started saying it, not as an address, but as a thing he was holding carefully. Will you stay? She looked at the envelope from the school board, at the leather pouch, at Thomas's journal, at the exit he'd laid out for her on a work table because he loved her enough not to trap her. I already decided in the canyon, she said. You know that. I know. I wanted to ask anyway. A pause. Properly. She came around the table. He didn't reach for her. He was not a man who reached. She'd learned that he waited with the particular patience of someone who has been waiting their whole life and knows that the things worth having come toward you when you've made it safe for them to do so. She closed the distance herself. The kiss was not like anything she'd told herself it would be during the 2 weeks she'd been carefully not thinking about it. It was not spectacular or overwhelming. It was quiet and certain and completely real, the way things are real when they've been earned rather than arranged. When she stepped back, Wyatt's eyes were open. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has just received something he had genuinely stopped expecting. The schoolhouse, she said, because she needed to say something practical before she stopped being able to. Where were you thinking of building it? He cleared his throat. West side of the south pasture. Good flat ground. Kids could walk from most of the ranch families in under 20 minutes. I'll want to see the ground. Tomorrow. Today, she said. Take me today. I want to see where it starts. They walked out into the afternoon together, and Ruth was in the kitchen doorway when they passed. Not watching exactly, just present the way Ruth was always present, with the particular awareness of a woman who misses nothing and says very little about what she sees. She looked at their faces. She looked at the table through the window where the envelope and the pouch were still sitting untouched. She made a sound that was not quite a word, went back inside, and started on supper. The south pasture ground was exactly what Wyatt had described, flat, solid, good sun, the kind of ground that a building trusts. He'd already had timber hauled in. 3 foundation posts were already in the earth. Clara stopped when she saw them. You really did this before Durango, she said. I had 2 days between Thomas's evidence and the ride to court. I needed to do something useful. She looked at the posts, at the timber, at the beginnings of something that didn't exist yet but would. 14 children, she said. At least. Probably more once word gets around. She nodded slowly. We'll need reading primers. And paper, real paper, not whatever scraps are available. And a decent blackboard. I won't run a schoolhouse without a proper blackboard, Wyatt. I have standards. Write me a list, he said. I'll get everything on it. I will write you a very long list. I reckon you will. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with his arms crossed and his hat low and his expression showing exactly what he intended it to show, which was everything. No management. No wall. Just the man who was standing in a half-built field in the summer turning autumn light, having just asked a schoolteacher to stay, and having been told yes, and was now standing inside that yes with his whole body. "Wyatt," she said. "Clara." Thomas would have liked this. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't absence but presence, the full weight of a person being in a moment rather than passing through it. "Yeah," he said. He would have taken credit for all of it. He would have deserved some of it. More than some. He looked at the foundation posts. He trusted the right person. That's worth a lot. Clara looked at the posts too. At the space between them where walls would eventually stand. At the ground that would one day hold 14 children learning to read, maybe more as the word spread as the community grew around what was being built here, not just in timber and nails, but in the slower, more durable material of two people who had chosen each other honestly. "So did you," she said. He looked at her. "Trust the right person," she said. "In your yard when you had 4 seconds. You made a reckless decision for the right reason. That matters." He was quiet for a moment more. Then, "It also nearly got you arrested." "It did get me arrested. I apologize for that." "I've been arrested now," she said. "I survived it. I feel it makes me considerably more interesting than I was before." He made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was becoming, she'd decided, her favorite sound in the territory. The late afternoon light was the particular gold of summer's last serious effort, warm and honest and lasting exactly long enough for a person to notice it before it changed. It touched the timber posts. It touched the flat good ground. It touched Wyatt Boone's worn coat, and Clara Whitaker's gray dress, and the space between them that had been closing degree by degree since the moment she'd stepped into his yard with a dead man's letter and someone else's trouble, and the particular stubborn decency that Thomas had trusted with everything he had left. She took his hand. He held it not tightly, not loosely, just with the solid present grip of a man who has decided to stop being careful with things he wants to keep. Around them, Boone Ridge moved in its evening rhythms. The horses in the north pasture, the sound of Ruth in the kitchen. The last heat of the day pressing gently against everything it touched. The mountain pass on the ridge no longer a threat, not yet a triumph, just land, just ground, just a place where the future ran through on its way to being something else. Thomas's secret was buried. Not in the ground, not in silence, but in the kind of honest ground where things that are buried can eventually grow. And in the foundations of an unfinished schoolhouse in the last light of a Colorado summer, Wyatt Boone and Clara Whitaker stood side by side and held on. Not because they had to, because they meant it. And that was the difference that mattered. The schoolhouse went up in 11 days. Not because 11 days was a reasonable amount of time to build a schoolhouse. It wasn't. But because Wyatt had told 3 ranch families what was coming, and those 3 families had told 4 others. And on the second morning, Clara came out at dawn to find 9 men already working the frame without having been asked, with Ruth moving among them distributing coffee with the efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for this particular occasion for a while. Clara stood at the edge of the south pasture and watched the walls go up and felt something she didn't have a precise name for. It wasn't happiness exactly, though happiness was part of it. It was more like rightness, the specific sensation of a thing being where it belonged. She went inside and started writing the supply list she'd promised Wyatt. It was as predicted very long. The first day of school was a Tuesday in early September, when the summer had finally admitted it was losing the argument with autumn, and the mornings had taken on a new quality of light, cleaner, crisper, honest, in the way of things that no longer have anything to prove. 14 children arrived, then a 15th. Then an hour late and out of breath from the ride, a 16th, a girl of about 9, named May, from the Harker family on the far north edge of the ranch, who had clearly run most of the way from the trail, and arrived with her boots muddy and her face determined, and a look in her eyes that Clara recognized immediately. She'd had that look herself at 9. It meant, "I will learn everything you are willing to teach me, and I will not be sorry about how much of it I take." "You must be May," Clara said. "My pa said I could come if I finished my chores first," May said, slightly out of breath. "I finished real fast." "Then sit down," Clara said. "You haven't missed anything important." May sat. Clara began. And the thing that had started as a lie, told in a dusty yard at a funeral for a man who had trusted the right person too late, became on a Tuesday in September, a schoolhouse full of children learning to read. That evening, Wyatt found her still at the teacher's desk organizing the next day's work. He leaned in the doorway, the way he leaned in doorways, not blocking the exit, just present, watching. "How many?" he said. 16 today, possibly 18 by the end of the week. The Garfield family sent word that their boys want to come. She looked up. "We'll need another bench. I'll build it this weekend." 2 benches. 2 benches, he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "You look different in here." "Different how?" "Like yourself," he said simply, and went back to the ranch before she could respond, which was extremely characteristic. And also she was learning one of his more effective habits. He said the thing and left her with it because he understood that she needed time to hold things properly before she could answer them. She held it all the way home. The federal investigation results arrived on a Thursday 2 weeks later, in the form of a letter from the Denver Land Office, and 3 hours afterward, the Durango newspaper, which ran the story on its front page under a headline that Clara read twice before she let herself believe it: Creed Syndicate indicted on federal fraud and conspiracy charges. Railroad land claims across 3 territories under review. Mabel Garrett arrived at Boone Ridge before noon with the newspaper a pie and the expression of a woman who had been right about something for a long time and was now in the particular position of being vindicated. Without wanting to say, "I told you so," because "I told you so" is not what the moment calls for, but is extremely difficult to suppress entirely. They're saying there are 7 other ranchers across Colorado and New Mexico who had their land agreements altered, Mabel said, sitting at Ruth's kitchen table with her hands around a coffee cup. 7 families. Some of them lost land already, sold under false terms. She shook her head. Silas Creed has been doing this for 15 years. Clara thought about Thomas, who had found the forgery, and understood immediately what it meant not just for Boone Ridge, but for everyone Creed had touched. Who had run out of time before he could do anything about the rest of them? "The federal office will contact those families," she said. "Already have, from what I'm told. But some of them, the ones who sold and moved on, they may not get it back. The land's already developed." Mabel looked at Clara steadily. "What Wyatt put in front of that judge stopped it from getting worse. What you brought from Thomas stopped it before another family lost everything." Clara said nothing. Mabel covered her hand with one warm, broad palm. "I owe you an apology," she said, "for the questions I asked the first day, for the look on my face when Silas made those accusations in the yard." "You didn't know me," Clara said. "No, but I should have known Wyatt." Mabel's jaw tightened briefly. "Wyatt Boone has never in his life done anything without a decent reason. I forgot that because Silas Creed is very convincing, and I'm not immune to very convincing men." She patted Clara's hand once and withdrew. "I won't forget it again." The letter from Evelyn Creed arrived on a Monday. It was addressed to Clara, directly postmarked Denver, written in the precise, controlled hand of a woman who has decided to be thorough even when thorough is hard. Clara read it at the kitchen table, while Ruth pretended to be busy at the stove. Evelyn had found her father's private ledger in a locked desk at the Durango house, while collecting her own belongings before the property was seized. She had turned it over to the federal marshal, but before she had, she'd read it. The ledger documented in Silas Creed's own shorthand every land manipulation, every payment to every complicit official, and one entry from May in the week Thomas died, recording a payment to a man named Cal Deller for services rendered near the Eastern Ridge on the 14th. Deller, the letter noted, had been arrested in New Mexico 2 weeks prior on an unrelated matter and had already begun talking to federal authorities about his work for Creed. It was done, fully, finally, with the kind of closed door that doesn't leave gaps. Clara set the letter down. She sat at the table for a long moment without speaking. Ruth did not turn from the stove. She just waited, the way Ruth waited for everything, with the patient understanding that some moments need the space to be what they are before anyone says anything about them. "It's finished," Clara said. "Yes," Ruth said. Not from the stove. From right beside her, she'd crossed the kitchen without Clara hearing it. She put a hand on Clara's shoulder once briefly, Ruth's version of an embrace. Thomas would have been glad. I know. Clara covered Ruth's hand with hers. So am I. She went to find Wyatt. He was in the north pasture, which was where he went when he had things to work out, and she knew now to find him there the way she'd learned to find him everywhere on this ranch, by understanding the particular patterns of how he moved when he was thinking. He was working the fence line when she came up, which meant he'd already known something was in that letter before he'd seen it, because Wyatt Boone had 17 years of reading when a day was about to change. She showed him the letter. He read it standing there with the fence post tool still in his hand, and when he finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. He folded the letter and gave it back to her and looked at the ridge, the east face, the mountain pass, the place where his brother had died, on a trail he'd ridden 100 times. It's done. She said the same words she'd said to Ruth. Yeah. His voice was rough at the edges. Yeah, it is. She stood beside him and did not try to smooth it over or move it along, because grief is not something you move along. You stand next to it and let it be what it needs to be, and you stay, which is the most important part. They stood there for a while. Then Wyatt said, I'm going to open the mountain pass. She looked at him. Fair trade route, he said. Not railroad wagon road. Open access for any rancher who needs it. No toll, no agreement, no Creed-style conditions. He looked at her. Thomas found that pass when we were boys. He used to say it belonged to everyone who needed it. He was right. When? She said. End of the month. I'll have the road cleared by then. Invite the community to witness it. Thomas's name should be on it, Clara said. The road. Something official. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Boone Pass, he said. That was always what the old maps called it before Creed started calling it a syndicate asset. We'll just use the right name. She nodded. That's right, she said. That's exactly right. The argument happened on a Wednesday night in the 3rd week of September, and it was a real one. The kind that two people who have promised each other honesty eventually have to have, because honesty means saying the hard things too, not just the easy ones. Wyatt had been managing correspondence with the Federal Land Office for 2 weeks without telling her. Letters going back and forth about the other 7 families, about the scope of Creed's operations, about whether Boone Ridge had any legal exposure from the original land agreement, even after the fraud ruling. He'd been handling it the way he handled everything before her, alone at the desk, late at night, making decisions without consulting the person who had promised to be his partner in exactly this kind of thing. She found the letters when she was reorganizing the study. She put them on the desk between them that evening and said, "Explain these." He looked at them. He knew immediately. I didn't want to worry you while the school was getting started. That is the wrong answer, she said. Clara. No. Her voice was even, controlled. The voice she used when she was genuinely angry, not performatively. We made an agreement. No secrets. Not about the things that are keeping you up at night. These letters are exactly the kind of thing that agreement was made for. I was protecting you. I don't need protection from information. I need a partner. She sat across from him. Wyatt, I left a life in Millbrook. I built a schoolhouse here. I have 16 children who are counting on me to be here next Tuesday and the Tuesday after that. I am not fragile. I am not temporary. Stop treating me like I might disappear if you hand me something heavy. He was quiet. The agreement, she said, goes both ways. I tell you when something is hard. You tell me when something is hard. That was the deal. Yes, he said. It was. Are you going to keep it? Another silence. Longer. The kind where a person is actually deciding something rather than just waiting to respond. I'll try, he said. Genuinely. Not as something I say to end an argument. I know the difference, she said. That's why I'm asking. I know you know. He looked at her. I'm sorry. For the letters. For doing it the old way without thinking. Old habits, she said. Old habits, he agreed. I'm working on it. She pulled one of the letters toward her. "Now tell me what this says, and we'll figure it out together," he told her. They figured it out together. It took 2 hours and required Ruth to bring in coffee at the halfway point without being asked, which meant Ruth had been listening from the kitchen and had decided the crisis was resolving satisfactorily. That was the argument. And on the other side of it, the thing they'd built was sturdier than it had been going in. That was the difference. Before, a hard thing would have been managed and suppressed and eventually built into the wall. Now it went through and came out the other side, and what was left was solid. Wyatt found the school ledger on a Friday morning. He hadn't meant to read it. He'd been looking for a particular account document and had picked up the wrong book, and by the time he understood what he was holding, he'd already read the first page. Clara's handwriting. The same careful, precise hand that had copied Thomas's documents, that had marked the land agreement's fraudulent sections, that had written the list of school supplies he'd ordered in September. At the top of the first page, above the roster of students, above the dates and the lesson plans, she'd written something in slightly larger letters than the rest, not decorative, just clear the way Clara wrote things she intended to be read. A home is not the place that claims you. It is the place where you are finally allowed to become yourself. Wyatt stood at the study desk and read it twice. He thought about the day she'd arrived in his yard, in a worn gray dress with a dead man's letter, and 30 seconds until Silas Creed's men got to her. He thought about the trading post and the church picnic and the canyon and the courthouse. He thought about 11 days of building and 16 children on a Tuesday morning and 2 hours of an honest argument on a Wednesday night. He set the ledger down. He went to find Clara. She was at the schoolhouse. She was always at the schoolhouse before 8 o'clock, reorganizing something or preparing something or simply being there. Because Clara Whitaker did not do things by half measures, and a school was not a thing you ran from a distance. He found her at the teacher's desk with May Harker's reading primer open in front of her, making notes in the margin. She looked up when he came in. He was holding the ledger. She looked at it, then at him. Her expression shifted, not defensive, just attentive. "That's the school record," she said. "I know, I picked up the wrong book." He set it on the desk between them. "I read the first page." She looked at what she'd written. She didn't say anything. "Is that what this is?" he said. "For you?" She looked up at him. "A place where you're finally allowed to become yourself," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "That's what it is." He nodded. Once. Slow. Then he came around the desk, and she turned in the chair to face him, and he crouched down so they were at eye level, the way he'd never done before. Wyatt Boone, who was taller than most rooms expected, and usually operated from that height, and looked at her directly. "Clara Boone," he said, "will you stay married to me because you want to?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then, "I already did," she said. "You were just too stubborn to notice." The sound he made then was the real one, not the almost laugh, not the controlled exhale, but the actual laugh of a man caught entirely off guard by something that has hit him exactly where he needed it to. It lasted about 3 seconds. Then he pressed his forehead briefly against hers, the way people who have been through things together sometimes do not, as performance, just as contact, just as the physical acknowledgement of something that doesn't fit into words. May Harker arrived 8 minutes later and found her teacher at the desk with a slightly suspicious amount of composure, and her husband standing by the door with his hat back on, and an expression May would describe to her mother that evening as looking like a man who'd been told something real good. May was not wrong. The opening of Boone Pass happened on the last Saturday of September, when the mountain was already showing the first color at the high tree line, and the air had fully committed to autumn. 31 people came. Mabel Garrett came. 3 of the families whose land agreements were under federal review came. They'd traveled 2 days, and Wyatt had made sure they had a place to stay. A federal land office representative came from Denver with a document making the road designation official. Ruth came and stood at the back and did not cry, though her eyes did something in the vicinity of it. Wyatt didn't make a speech. Clara hadn't expected him to. She knew by now that Wyatt's version of public statement was simply action, simply doing the thing and letting it speak in the way that things done well always speak. But before he opened the gate, he pulled a small painted sign from under his coat and nailed it to the post. Boone Pass. Beneath the name in Clara's handwriting, he'd asked her the night before, a single line open to all who need it. The community stood quietly for a moment after the gate swung open. Then Mabel Garrett said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Thomas Boone would have loved this." And the 31 people standing at the entrance to a mountain pass in the last warm days of a Colorado September agreed in their various ways, with nods, with silence, with the particular weight of people who are witnessing something being set right after being wrong for too long. Clara stood beside Wyatt. His hand found hers. She held on. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the federal representative had taken his document back to Denver, and Mabel had extracted a promise from Clara to come for supper the following week, they rode to the East Ridge together. To Thomas's grave, which was on a low knoll below the pass where the ground was quiet and the mountain was visible, and the summer's last warmth still lingered in the rock. Wyatt stood at the grave for a while. Clara stood beside him and said nothing because Thomas had been her errand and his brother, and the reason they were both standing here, and some things belonged to the person who is carrying them. After a while, Wyatt said, "He would have liked you." "He did like me," she said. "He told me I was the most honest person he knew." "He told me the same thing." A pause. "He was right both times." She looked at Thomas's marker simple stone, the name and dates and the single line Wyatt had carved himself. "He trusted well." "He did," she said. Wyatt looked at her then, the way he'd been looking at her since the canyon, the way he looked at things he had decided to stop being careful with. No wall, no management, just him fully present in the way of someone who has stopped using survival as an excuse to hold back. "I reckon we should get back," he said. "The supper won't cook itself," she agreed. "Ruth's already started it." "Ruth started it an hour ago," Clara said. "She probably started it when we left." "She started it before we left," he said. "She told me this morning to be back by 6. Clara laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind she'd been increasingly free with since the schoolhouse went up, since the charges were dismissed, since she'd stopped counting the days until she left, and started just living the ones she was in. They rode back together through the autumn afternoon through the land that had tried to be taken, and hadn't been, through the air that smelled like pine and turned leaves, and the first cold edge of a season that was coming, whether anyone was ready or not. Ruth had supper on the table when they walked in. She looked at their faces once, set an extra piece of bread beside Wyatt's plate, without a word, and went back to the kitchen. Clara sat at the table where 3 weeks ago she'd sat across from Silas Creed's terrible patients and turned down $10,000 and said no with the kind of finality that ends certain chapters for good. She sat at the table where she'd worked late into the night over account books and land documents, where she'd argued honestly and been heard, where she'd been handed an exit and chosen not to take it. She picked up her fork. Across from her, Wyatt was already eating hat, hung on its peg coat on the chair, as settled as a man gets when he is exactly where he belongs. Outside Boone Pass was open for the first time in 2 years, open to every rancher and family and traveler who needed to move through the mountain on a road named for the man who had known it should never have been closed. And in a schoolhouse on the south pasture, 16 ledger lines waited for Tuesday, each one holding a name that would grow into something none of them could entirely predict. Their marriage had begun as a lie, told in the dust of a summer funeral, spoken in 4 seconds, by a man who had chosen to act before he had time to be afraid. But some lies are only doors, and some doors open onto rooms where the truth has been waiting patient and certain for someone brave enough to walk through and call it home. Wyatt Boone and Clara Whitaker had walked through, and they were never going back.